Good morning. Welcome to this morning's Faith Forum. It's a very exciting day to get to welcome Dr. Meg Jay to Christ Church. I know we're all excited to hear from you. Before we do that, let's begin with a prayer. This prayer is from the Book of Common Prayer, and it's a prayer for young people. The Lord be with you. Let us pray. God, our Father, you see your children growing up in an unsteady and confusing world. Show them that your ways give more life than the ways of the world, and that following you is better than chasing after selfish goals. Help them to take failure not as a measurement of their worth, but as a chance for a new start. Give them strength to hold their faith in you and to keep alive their joy in your creation. Through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. Well, I'm thrilled to welcome Dr. Meg Jay, a clinical psychologist and best-selling author, to be with us today in our Faithful Forum. We're here to talk about your book, The 20-Something Treatment, and to think about the way that this work focuses on the challenges that young adults face today. We know that it's a critical period in the lives of young adults, and we also know that because we are people who are connected, it is therefore a critical period for all of us at every age and stage. Many of you know Dr. Jay from her many other books. She's the author of The Defining Decade, Why Your 20s Matter, and How to Make the Most of Them Now, and Supernormal, The Secret World of the Family Hero. I know that many of you are here today because you were here when Meg visited 5 years ago, and after hearing her then and watching her in many other channels, are looking forward to hearing more today. Your insights are valuable to us, not only for people who are in their 20s, but for all of us as mentors, as community members, and as family members. And I'm really excited to dive into conversation with you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's lovely to be back here. It's a real pleasure and a privilege already. I loved the prayer. It was perfect. And I look forward to having our conversation.
The interesting thing I think about that prayer is it was written in this prayer book, which is from the 1970s. And
Nice.
It could have been written yesterday.
Absolutely.
And many of our prayers in our tradition were written much before that, even sometimes centuries before. And we still find ourselves saying words and praying things that really matter to us as we sit here. So, glad to be here with you. Would you start by talking about your own journey, about your journey into the field of psychology and what has led you to focus on the challenges of young adulthood?
Sure, yes. So like Elizabeth said, my name is Meg, and I'm a clinical psychologist, and I specialize in 20-somethings. I'm up in Charlottesville, but a little piece of trivia about me is I was born and raised in Greenville, South Carolina, right down the road, so this is almost like home for me. But for 25 years, actually, I've been specializing in 20-somethings, and usually when I tell people, their reaction is something like, why would you do that? Which kind of gets at, culturally, I think how we think about the 20s is that, you know, there's nothing really important going on. What could possibly be so difficult or so stressful? But as we're going to talk about, or as you may know, if you're in your 20s or you have a 20-something at home, it's actually a uniquely challenging time, but also a uniquely wonderful time. And I hope we'll touch on both of those aspects today. I was an undergrad at UVA, so I'm back there now. I got my PhD at Berkeley. And somewhere along the way, and this is very typical for 20-something journeys and maybe all of our journeys, I didn't go into my 20s knowing that I was going to be a clinical psychologist and I was going to specialize in 20-somethings and I was going to write books and give talks and make a difference in the world. I knew I wanted to do something purposeful with my life, but I didn't know what it was going to be when I started out. And I hope that'll be part of our conversation too, is that I think that's one of the stressors for young adults, is that they want to have great lives, they want to do something meaningful and purposeful, but when you're starting out, you don't yet know what that's going to be.
Great. Well, would you talk about that starting out? What can you talk about right now for us to know a little bit more about what you're experiencing when you think about people in their 20s and what those struggles are that have led you to be here with us
Sure,
today?
yes. Well, my first book about 20-somethings is called The Defining Decade. And so really quickly, for people who aren't familiar with it, it's really about why our 20s are defining. So a few stats for you is that about 80% of life's most defining moments take place by age 35. Average age of marriage is 30, average age of first child is 30, average age of career satisfaction, starting to experience that is 32, average age of first home ownership is 35. We know that your lifetime earning potential is largely decided in your 20s, not because you'll make the most money then, but because your learning curve in your 20s predicts your earning curve in your 30s and beyond. And then, most people don't know this, but your personality changes more in your 20s than any other time in life. And what my most recent book is about the 20-something treatment. Most people also don't know this, or maybe you're recently hearing about it, is that our 20s are actually the mental health low point of life and have been for quite some time. And those things go together. I work with 20-somethings because all those defining moments, by working with 20-somethings, I get to help people get in front of those defining moments and make those choices around work and love and where you're going to live and who you're going to be and what your purpose is going to be. I get to help people get in front of those decisions and make those in a way that they're going to feel good about in their 30s and 40s and 50s. But in that process, there's a lot of uncertainty, and the brain doesn't like uncertainty. No one likes uncertainty. I picked up on the word unsteady in the prayer that you mentioned. That's the hardest part about being in your 20s. There's so much uncertainty and unsteadiness because all of those defining moments I talked about, they're coming, but they're not there yet. And so you wake up in the morning as a 20-something and you don't know if anyone's ever going to love you. You don't know if you're ever going to pay your bills. You don't know where you're going to work in 5 years. And that's hard to wake up to that every day all at the same time.
Would you say that those struggles are unique to this time?
To the 20s or to
To
this era?
This era.
Yes and no. I think they have been unique to the 20s in the 21st century. So I'm a Gen Xer, so my 20s unfolded a lot like the 20s do now, minus the social media, thank goodness. But if you looked at my parents, they were married by 23, they had 2 kids by 26, and certainly many young adults are still doing that, but for other many young adults, it happens sort of at a later time. It takes longer to put together some of those adult milestones. So I think 75 years ago, the 20s were definitely different than they are right now. But in terms of the adult milestones shifting upwards and then leaving 20-somethings with more uncertainty and more unsteadiness, that's been true for about 2 decades, which is useful because that means we know something about how people do this, how they put together a life in the 21st century.
Yeah, thank you. You mentioned a couple things that I think we would all like to hear more about. You mentioned mental health and you mentioned media, and those are 2 things that right away I know come to our mind as they're topics that we talk a lot about, I think, in this space and also within our own families. So let's start with mental health. It's a big topic for young adults, for all people. And I wonder what you could speak about in terms of what you're seeing, what you experience with your clients, with your students, and what you might say to us about resilience and facing uncertainty in a healthy way.
Sure. So, mental health has really exploded into the national conversation, and I think that is, like most things, mixed, good and not good. I think it's great that people are talking more about mental health, but I also think it depends on what the conversation is, maybe what the information is that you're getting. But as I mentioned before, and again, most people don't know this, but there's the curve of well-being, life satisfaction. There's a general J curve through life. So it starts off pretty high or pretty well in childhood. trends downward through the teenage years, bottoms out in the 20s, but the good news is it goes up from there. That's where you get that J curve. So a lot of people are surprised about this, and they feel like, well, I'm doing something wrong. I heard my 20s were supposed to be the best years of my life. I would like to correct that misconception that none of the data suggest that your 20s are going to be the best years of your life. And if you think about it, why would they be? I talked about all the uncertainty, how difficult that is, but this is also when we're having our starter not so great jobs, our starter maybe not so great relationships, living with roommates we may not know well financially. These are, often the most difficult years of adulthood. So it's very normal for 20-somethings to feel stressed, anxious, depressed, and more in their 20s, and that has been true for the 25 years I've been doing this. Some people are, asking the question, well, are 20-somethings now struggling more with their mental health than 20-somethings were 10 or 20 years ago? For reasons I won't bore you with, that's a very difficult question to answer because you can never tease apart reporting differences, the fact that we're talking about it more, social contagion, even just a different understanding of how we think about depression and anxiety. I think the more important part of that conversation is that for all of the 21st century, the 20s have been the mental health low point. And again, I know that sounds like not great news, but the good news is that life gets better as you go through adulthood. And if you think about it developmentally, this makes a lot of sense, that as people start to put together communities that are meaningful to them, jobs that are meaningful, relationships that are supportive, friendships that are substantial. They have the finances, so they wake up in the morning, not feeling worried from the moment they open their eyes. That, of course, life satisfaction, well-being, and mental health really in all ways improve. So, when people say, why do you work with 20-somethings? What they're not understanding is that it's actually, from a mental health perspective, the most difficult time of life, but also the time when you can really improve your mental health by improving your day-to-day life.
How does that show up for you, either with students in your classroom or with young adults who are coming to you in your professional relationships? What does it look like when people are showing up at their mental health low point? And what are ways that you walk with them?
Yeah, well, it looks like a lot of tears, a lot of stress, a lot of anxiety, a lot of what if. When people are uncertain, the brain interprets uncertainty as danger, which makes sense from an evolutionary perspective. If you don't know what's around the corner, better safe than sorry. So 20-somethings do a lot of what we call catastrophic thinking, a lot of what-ifing. What if no one ever loves me? What if I never figure out my purpose? What if I'm not as successful as my parents? What if I never have a family? So I see that goes on a lot. So probably several times a day, I talk about the brain and uncertainty and the feeling of danger and catastrophic thinking, but it's really, I think, helping 20-somethings shift from what if to what else. What else could we be saying about how your future could unfold? What would it look like for you for life to turn out well? And what can we be doing now to help you get there? And I think even just 20-somethings understanding this is normal to feel stressed and anxious and teary and worried about your future. It doesn't mean there's something wrong with you. It doesn't mean that you're doomed or disordered. It doesn't have the meaning around that means that you aren't doing something right and it's not going to work out. It's just what your brain is going to do. The flip side of how this shows up for me, I was thinking about this driving down yesterday. So I see a lot of tears and what ifs and my life's never going to work out in my office. And I also see what happens 5 or 10 years later because my clients are very lovely people who often keep in touch with me. And on Friday, I got a save the date postcard in the mail of a former client inviting me to her wedding. And I will say this was after her previous she was engaged to someone else, and that fell through in her 20s and was, felt quite catastrophic. And now she's, in a better place than she could have imagined, a few years ago. And also on Friday, a former client came by to visit and brought her husband and her very adorable 7-month-old baby, who I got to, hold for our whole conversation. So, I see both sides. I think the 20-somethings who see me, they're catastrophizing, they're worried, they see all the what-ifing, but I see the what else. I see what else could happen other than the worst case scenario. So I think it's sort of giving people hope that, I have every reason to believe that your life and your mental health is going to get better, but we know that that usually gets better as life gets better. So what contributes to people having better mental health, better relationships, job security, financial security, communities that matter, faith, that helping people put these things together in their 20s or through their 20s so that by the end of their 20s, they, it really starts to come to fruition. And that's why the people who are crying in my office at 23 are showing up with their really cool partner and really adorable baby at 33.
I think we can all hold on to that phrase, not what if, but what else. And I love the positive angle. I think I'm going to try to remember it for a sermon. But my mind also goes to a shadow side of what else when I think about social media. And I think about the fact that we know so much now about other people's lives, real and imagined, because of the access that we have on our phones and in social media. So would you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. I hadn't thought about it, but that's the not so great place your brain can go with the what else, which happens a lot in your 20s. What else could I be doing? Who else could I be hanging with? Where else could I be traveling? And I think, again, what we know is that the more anxious and uncertain people are feeling, the more they use social media because they're looking for information. Their brain is trying to figure out, am I okay? Where do I stand? How do I stack up? So the brain is trying to find certainty. Unfortunately, this is just the worst possible place to look because all you're going to come away with feeling certain about after you look at social media is that you really are doing it wrong because everybody else has really got something better than you. But I get it. That's the issue. So I think even just helping young adults understand that your brain is looking for some sort of information about whether you're okay, whether you're on track, whether you're on time, whether things are going to work out, then those are healthy, normal questions to be asking in your 20s, but the way to answer them is not by looking at other people's lives. I'm sure you've all heard compare and despair, or comparison is the thief of joy. No one comes away from social media feeling like, I feel so much better about what I'm doing. So I think the onus is real. We know that it's not necessarily a fair fight between the brain and social media. Yet 20-somethings are adults, and so it is really up to them to start to do a gut check around, well, how does this make me feel? Why am I using my device? What am I looking for? How might I find that in a way that makes me feel happier and healthier if social media isn't doing it for me? I think for myself, the busier and happier and more excited I am about myself or my partner or my kids or my work, the less I care about what other people are doing. And so I think that's something for us to remember as older adults, is that when you're in your 20s, you don't have that yet. So you don't have this, when you love your work, you're not thinking, maybe I should have been a hedge fund manager. You're thinking, I love my work, it's so purposeful, it's so meaningful. You don't compare and think I should have gone into consulting, which is sort of what every confused 20-something seems to be saying these days. But when you're in your 20s, you don't have that yet. You have uncertainty and you're looking for answers. But again, most 20-somethings who I meet with, when I have a new client, I go through the whole host of tell me about substances, tell me about devices, tell me about social media. I mean, I very explicitly ask about this because it does have a direct impact on, how happy and healthy people feel on a day-to-day basis. And so I really try to ask them, what do you think about your own social media use? And in all the years I've been doing this since social media has been around, not one person ever said, I really wish I looked at my phone more. That I think this is, we've all heard no one on their deathbed is going to say, I wish I'd worked more. I think the new version of that is no one on their deathbed is going to say, I wish I'd looked at my phone more. But we're spending a lot of time on that. So, I asked 20-somethings to be honest with themselves about the impact on their mental health. But for me, I'm a very time-oriented person. The defining decade is really about how important your 20s are. It's a chunk of time where developmentally so much is happening, and you kind of use it or lose it in a way. And people are losing a lot of time on their devices when they could be sort of cultivating, actually, I think the very things they're looking for on the screen.
Thank you so much. You talked to me when we were preparing about diagnoses. I appreciate that you share with us what are some of the things you ask clients when they come in. And you talked about the response of some doctors to give medicine, give drugs to 20-somethings at a much higher rate than in the past. And so could you could you share what we talked about before? I think that was an interesting reflection.
Sure, absolutely. So in my latest book, it's called The 20-something Treatment, and it's really about an age-specific approach to young adult mental health. Because as I talked about before, if you really want to understand young adult mental health, you have to understand it in the context of everything that I just said. And so when a young adult goes into a doctor's office, I think the big question is whether or not their struggles are being seen in the context of their development and being seen in the context of, oh my gosh, I don't have a job, I don't know if anyone's going to love me, or someone just broke my heart, or if it's just being looked at in sort of a face valid symptom based way. So as a 20-something, it's actually extremely easy to meet criteria for a whole host of DSM-4 diagnoses. Many 20-somethings can check the diagnostic box of depression and anxiety. And I'm not dismissing it and saying that's not real and they're not having those struggles, but I am saying that usually they're situationally located, and so they get better as their situations get better. So I really question the value of focusing more on diagnosis than on development. So I say with clients, okay, sure, you meet the diagnostic criteria, but I think if we work on the things that are making you feel depressed or the things that are making you feel anxious, I don't think you're going to meet those criteria in 6 months or 2 years. And so let's do that rather than give yourself a label that may stick with you internally through life or have you feel sort of disordered or damaged or doomed in your 20s. The offshoot of that is, what happens when you have a diagnosis in our culture. You quickly receive a medication. And I'm not saying that medications are never warranted or useful or necessary. They are currently overused in 20-somethings. That we know that I think it's 80% of psychiatric medication prescriptions come through GPs, and I have nothing against GPs, but in their appointments they often can't get into the context of what's going on in your life. They hear the symptoms, and then of course they've been trained to say, well, we have a medication for that. And well, we kind of do, but most mental health medications have side effects that can be significant for young adults and interfere with young adult development. So in my work, I emphasize skills over pills, and even for clients who need medications, who have mental health struggles where medication is definitely and clearly indicated, they also need skills. And even for 20-somethings who say, well, I want to use medication, it's a tool for me, it's available for me, when I say, okay, great, let's work with a psychiatrist, make sure you're getting the right amount at the right time for the right reasons. Do you want to use this forever? And most of them say, oh, goodness, no. And then, okay, well, then we're going to need to work on the skills that you'll need so that you can ultimately go off the medication and kind of have what you need to live your life without it, which, I would say most 20-somethings, even the ones who are choosing to use medications, want and need to build their skills too.
What are some of the skills that you work with your patients to build or recommend to them?
Yeah, so in the 20-something treatment, I have 12 chapters, and each one is a skill. They're broad. So how to think, so that is going back to catastrophic thinking. So it's helping 20-somethings recognize what is catastrophic thinking, how is this fueling anxiety within me to see an uncertain situation, assume the worst, not understand, oh, that's my brain. It's doing the better safe than sorry thing. So rather than what if, let me think about what else. How to feel. So how to help 20-somethings have difficult feelings. Their 20s are going to be full of negative emotions. But that doesn't mean that they need to panic or try to get rid of those emotions immediately, as much as it means, okay, you're feeling sad. What happened? What do we need to do about it? The number one cause for depression in young adults is a breakup. So let's call that what it is. That's grieving, not depression. And so the skill there is, how can I help you process this important loss and really help them see that developmentally this is a wonderful thing, that you cared about someone enough to be very sad that you've lost that person. I would be worried about you if you didn't have that reaction to an important loss. So let's help you learn how to grieve. This is probably not the last loss you're ever going to face in your life, and then you have that skill from there. How to work is a skill in the book that actually young adult jobs are the number one driver of positive growth and change. Believe it or not, jobs don't sound that developmentally important, but think about it. You spend 40 hours a week at your job. So, the new situations, the stressors, navigating adult relationships, navigating messing up, making mistakes, that how young adults learn to do that has a lot to do with their mental health, because a lot of that shows up as anxiety or depression when work isn't going well, 20-somethings aren't feeling well. I have how to cook in there, because feeling like a self-sufficient adult is also good for your mental health, and I think every 20-something should learn how to cook. Let's see, how to love is in there, and again, in that chapter, I talk about loss and grief. How to choose purpose is in the book, and I talk about faith some in that chapter. So, there's so much that 20-somethings. When you go into your 20s, you're at 20, you're basically a high school, college student, and then by the time you're 30, according to the stats, you have all those things I mentioned earlier, or thereabouts: partner, purpose, job, baby, house. I mean, that's all somewhere in that time period or coming soon. So if you think about all the skills that you need between being a college student and being responsible and enjoying all of those things, that's a lot of work to do. And so I think when you're trying to sort of be an adult and not feel like you have those skills, it makes people feel not so great. There was actually a study just out last week from Spain that showed that feeling like you're an adult, feeling like you have this, like the skills that you need to be the adult that's where you are in your stage of life, is that's what's associated with mental health. And again, I said that many 20-somethings have heard, oh, these are going to be the best years of your life. I tell my clients, if your 20s turn out to be the best years of your life, something has gone terribly wrong. Don't peak in your 20s. There's what you really want. I mean, I hope your 20s are great. I really do. I hope none of this applies to you and everybody's 20s are great. But even more, I hope your 30s are even better, and your 40s are even better, and your 50s are even better. And that's actually what all the data show, that despite our sort of romanticizing of youth and, oh, it must be so great to be in your 20s, none of the data support that in terms of it actually being, the funnest, best time of life. All the data show that life gets better as you have these sources of meaning and purpose and stability, and you can count on yourself, and you don't really care so much about what other people are doing anymore.
I can't help myself. If you've already been to church today, you know that the gospel that's read from Mark is the parable of the rich man, or sometimes it's called that. And it's a parable that actually doesn't use the word rich to describe the man, at least not in Mark. But it does say that he's a young man. And the thing that I kept thinking as Meg was talking was how that man presents so many things to Jesus as the steps he's taken in his life along the way, and yet he can't respond to Jesus, and he leaves grieving. And so I think it may be a really interesting thing if you haven't gone to church yet, or if you want to talk more with me before, if you've already been, I mean, because I think that there might be a lens to view that story, thinking about young adulthood and about some of the ways that the pressures that you describe right there fall upon all of us in this world, and the way that they can leave us really feeling empty and feeling like we're grieving.
Absolutely. And I think maybe in your previous question, you mentioned something about failures, and I think understanding, 21st century, 20-something years, really helps see failures in a different way. Most 20-something failures are not final. They're really just a failure to have everything that you want figured out already. So it's on average, 20-somethings have 9 different jobs by the age of 35. So think about that. That's a lot of jobs that don't work out on one end or the other. And the positive part of that is that by the time you do sort of settle into that 30-something career, you've figured a lot of stuff out. You've had jobs that didn't work, you've had jobs that you loved, and you headed more in that direction. I think something similar can happen, with relationships. But that's a lot of heartbreak, disappointment, surprise, loss, quote, failure along the way. But it's easy for me to say from the other side of the room, and someone who's been doing this forever, and I see, I see kind of what ultimately comes to fruition for most people. But those really aren't failures. They're just learning. They're just learning and growth, and sometimes it hurts. But it doesn't mean that the person is doing something wrong or that they failed.
How can people who are walking with young adults, like parents or their friends, respond in situations that feel catastrophic or feel like failures, to be supportive and to help reinforce that message?
Yeah, I think I gave an orientation talk at UVA this summer, and parents said, "What can we do to help?" And my thought was, don't panic, don't panic. College is not going to go perfectly. The 20s are not going to go perfectly. Although if I think about my client who I mentioned a minute ago, who had an engagement fall apart, that felt like that didn't go perfectly, yet here she is 4 years later in a much better, just perfect situation for herself. So even when things don't go perfectly, we don't know that they're not going actually the way that they should. And so I really encourage parents not to panic, but to problem solve, to model problem solving. That when I have a 20-something in my office who's struggling, I do not assume there's anything wrong with them, and I do not assume their life is not going to work out. I kind of assume the opposite. I assume that they're going through normally developmental struggles, and things are going to get better over time. So the question I'm asking myself is, what is it that they need that they don't have? What are the experiences they need? What's the advice they need? What's the information that they need? So it's don't panic, role model problem solving, that most of the problems that 20-somethings solve, often for the first time in their 20s, that's another reason all this is so hard, is they're doing all this for the first time. And fortunately for many of us sitting out there, and certainly for me, and I'm sure for Elizabeth, I've solved problems like this for myself or in conjunction with other people many, many times by my age. So I think it's just role modeling that you're having a problem, let's figure out how to solve it. And you're helping that person gain that skill, that problem-solving skill that then they're going to take with them the rest of their lives to solve, what will probably be more challenges and to help others do that. I think the role of community is really important with young adults. I mean, I think to whatever extent you can measure this, young adults like their parents more than we used to. So that's good. And I think that people who aren't parents sometimes get to say things and do things and play a role that's just unique and useful and powerful. I mean, that's my whole job is, I think to say things that are probably not that different than what mom or dad might say, but I'm not mom or dad, so I get to say it and people think it's amazing. So you could be that person by being, the aunt, the uncle, the grandmother, the teacher, the minister, the youth leader, the friend, the neighbor. 20-somethings are listening, and they're sponges, and they change really quickly. One of the metaphors I use a lot is that working with young adults is like working with airplanes just after takeoff. It's an up in the air and turbulent time, but a small change in course can make a big difference in terms of where the person ends up. And 20-somethings, because their brains are changing so quickly, their lives are changing so quickly, that you would be surprised. That one thing that you say that you didn't even know was exactly what they needed to hear ends up making a big difference, and they never forget it. So don't be afraid to be part of that 20-somethings community, and just to be the adult who's a bit further along and might have some life experience or some advice, words of wisdom, or just words of comfort that help the person change course.
Adding on to that question, as I look around this room, I also see parents of teenagers. I think for many of us, we had babies and we're told, oh, they'll be old before you know it, and then they get old very quickly. And so I think for parents of teens, I know many of us are looking at the 20s as not very far away. And I wonder, would you give any different advice to parents who are looking ahead to their kids being in that stage of life?
Well, I mean, my advice is yay, because it is this is my favorite age. I love college students, love 20-somethings. I mean, I've chosen, I think when I first wrote The Defining Decade, I had a lot to say about it, but I thought, I'm going to write that and then I'm going to be done talking about that. But I keep coming back to it because it's such an important age, such a fun age. So much is happening. And I mean fun developmentally. I don't mean fun in the Instagram way, but it's just so exciting to see, the kids that you raise becoming adults. I actually can speak from experience on this, of that I just sent my oldest to college, dropped him off in August for his first semester at college. I'm probably the only parent on earth who didn't cry. I didn't shed a single tear, not because I was ready to get rid of him, but because I'm so excited to have a college student and a 20-something, because I just think it's such a wonderful age and so much is happening that can really change not just your child for the better, but your family for the better. You get to, all sort of become adults together and renegotiate your relationships and step into a new chapter. So I guess my advice is get excited. I think heading into the college in the 20s is wonderful. My other piece of it is I wouldn't get too ahead of yourself. Some people will read my book and say, you're like The Defining Decade, which is, about how to sort of nail your 20s. And then they're like, I want my 12-year-old to read this. And no, that's stressful. A lot of what I end up doing with 20-somethings and college students in terms of skill building, a lot of it are skills they couldn't have gotten before they were adults. But some of it, I have to say, is a little bit of cleanup from high school. So if you have a high schooler at home, I would actually say focus on the basics, focus on the here and now, try to build sort of a capable, confident, easier said than done, I know, capable, confident, happy, healthy teenager in the here and now, and don't get too focused on we need to set this person up for success 15 years from now. There's I think a proverb of take care of the minutes and the years will take care of themselves. And I think that's especially true for teenagers, that if we can help them develop their basic everyday skills around taking care of themselves, being a good friend, communicating respectfully, just really going back to the basics, that they're going to carry that into college and 20s, and then they're going to be ready to read my book and take off from there. But one of the strongest predictors of positive mental health and positive romantic relationships in your late 20s is good friendships in high school. So again, I think if you've got parents of high schoolers, don't worry too much about the future. Worry about building a strong teenager now, and taking that into college will serve them.
Here's a final one, because I am thinking about this community and what a vibrant group of young adults we have here at Christ Church. And so as I ask you, thinking about community, what as parents, what as older adults, what as parents of younger adults, what should we be doing? What would you say to young adults about their friendships and their relationships in this period, and how to care for themselves and to both be taking care of their own young adulthood and others in their community?
Yeah, it's. I like it that you put both of those. When I've sailed on semester at sea twice as a professor, and we're traveling the world with young adults, and I mean that is as stressful as it sounds, and fun. But we have a saying of sassers, so those are like semester at seers. So we started to say sassers take care of sassers, meaning, if you're going to go into a new country and, 500 young adults are going to get off the ship, everybody needs to be looking out for each other. But we actually started to amend that because it was stressful of that kids felt like they needed to look out for each other. And that's especially hard when the kids themselves weren't looking out for themselves. That they weren't doing the work of, well, what do I need to do to be safe in this country, and not leave it up to my friends to take care of me. So we started to say sassers take care of sassers and sassers take care of themselves. So I think both of those pieces, we can't expect 20-somethings to get fellow 20-somethings through the 20s, that we need, the community, we need adults around them, and, near peers. So these are the older sisters or brothers or cousins or neighbors that are a little bit further along in terms of creating that community. And I do think that faith is a wonderful way to have that. And then, again, because job security, relationship security, sort of your future family, most of that is waiting for you at the end of your 20s, or will likely come to fruition end of your 20s, 30s. Friendships in your 20s are really, really important. They're essential. And so finding communities, I think, where those can grow and you can connect with like-minded individuals. There was I know you're not really asking about dating, but there was this chart I just put up on, my work has social media, and it showed where young couples meet each other now, and all the sources, friends, family, church, work, school, bars, they all went like this over the last 20 years, and online went straight up. And, I don't have an issue with people meeting each other online or being friends online, but I think we really need to sort of bring those numbers back together a bit and spend more time, face to face and shoulder to shoulder in our communities.
You're talking about so many things that we often talk about at Christ Church, and certainly you've mentioned faith a few times. Identity and purpose are all things that we think about a lot here. And so I wonder if you could speak directly to the role of faith and to the way that it intersects with the experience of young adults in their 20s.
Yeah, I would be glad to. So, many of you have probably heard of what's called the rise of the nuns, NONES, the not affiliated. So the proportion of young adults who are not affiliated with faith, with an organized faith, is at the highest point in history. I believe it's over 50% at this point. And what I see is that I feel like a lot of what young adults they come to my office looking for a lot of maybe what they might have found in previous generations through faith, or what they could still find through faith if they, went there instead of to therapy. That I think what a lot of young adults are looking for is community, a way to meet other young people who are like-minded, a way to support each other through difficult times, in the uncertainty and the unsteadiness of young adulthood, some sort of, guiding narratives or values. And, faith sort of has all this, in one package. And, I don't have a judgment on whether or not 20-somethings choose faith, but I am aware that a lot of what they're looking for in my office, they could find in a faith-based community. I do also hear more and more young adults say, I was raised kind of to choose my own adventure in terms of religion and figure that out for myself when I'm an adult. And I'm an adult now, and I think I want to do that because I feel like I want that for myself, for my new marriage, for the kids I'm going to raise. And I think it can provide a lot of structure, stability, community, hope, purpose. A lot of 20-somethings want purposeful lives, and I think that's great. I see a lot of distress over not having purposeful lives, and I kind of have to remind my clients of Maslow's hierarchy, where you start off with your safety needs, and then you kind of march your way up through friendships, relationships, work, etc. But kind of purpose and self-actualization is at the top. So I encourage 20-somethings not to panic if you haven't found your purpose or your passion yet. That's often comes from, as we all know, family, partners, children, communities, jobs. So it may take you some time to get there, but I think for people who want to be able to connect with purpose or meaning or something bigger than themselves sooner than that, then that's something that faith offers.
Thank you. We're going to start to close up. And before
Okay.
we do, I'd like to grab onto that word hope that you've mentioned several times. I think that was a beautiful part of the 20-something treatment. You close the book with hope. And so I wonder if you could close us now with advice or a message of hope for young adults and for those of us who are in community with young adults.
Yeah, I would just really circle back to what I said earlier, which is, I work with people in what is actually the mental health low point of life, but I have the most wonderful job because to me it's full of hope. That every day clients say, do you think I could ever be happy? Is anybody ever going to love me? Is my life ever going to get better? And I absolutely, from 25 years of doing this, assume that it will. I assume all of those things are going to happen for most of my clients, especially if they're in my office or in someone's office or talking to a friend or a family member. Asking those questions, that tells me they want these things, they're engaging with these things. So to me, I know that time is on their side, the data's on their side, that, that's what I really love about working with 20-somethings, is that I know that their lives are going to trend upwards, that, that they're on the upswing of the J curve, or that's right in front of them. And so it's really wonderful work to do.
Well, thank you for doing it, and thank you for being with us today to
My
share this
pleasure.
work.
Yeah.
Friends, one thing I'd like to remind you of before we leave this space today is that we are at a place in Christ's Church of great excitement as we open our Center for Well-Being and Care next weekend. This is work that we have been doing for decades at Christ Church, and now with the Center for Well-Being and Care, we'll be more poised to be in individual conversations, to be in group conversations, and to welcome speakers and workshops to talk more and more about our well-being and how that is something which fully encompasses all parts of our humanity, in addition to just our spiritual work that we do as we come and praise God each week. And so I hope next week you will join for that formal welcoming or opening of the Welcome Center. There is a concert on Friday night. There is a service on Saturday night. And on Sunday morning, we will have our usual worship services. And I hope that it will be a continuation of important and wonderful conversations like the ones that we had today with you, Meg. If you'd like
Sounds
to
wonderful.
speak more after this conversation with Meg, she'll be in the green room. It's a new space. I hope you've seen it, but if you haven't, I'll just point up to the balcony. It is a room that is actually green along the back hallway. Meg will be there to sell books, to sign books, and to talk to you. If you'd like to be able to have a little bit more time with her, please take advantage of that. And I'd like, before we close, to give her a round of applause. Thank you so much.
Thank you. That's fun. Thank you.
Thank you all. You were great. Thank you so much.